There's a growing feeling across the collective right now that the way we live needs to change. And so many people are being called back to community, not just connection online, but real lived community, sharing space, living near one another, and designing life together instead of in isolation. That brings up a very important question. If community is the future, then what does that look like from a housing and living perspective? How do the homes we live in shape our relationships, our nervous system, and our connection to the land? Today, I'm joined by Morgan Bierschink, founder and chief vision officer of Geoship, to explore how regenerative housing, conscious design, and community-driven development are helping shape the future of home. Welcome back to Level 1 Podcast. Today, I am honored to talk to founder Morgan from Geoship. I'm so excited. I can't even tell. I'm a little nervous because I just love this concept so much. And I've been talking about it and hinting on it throughout my podcast in different episodes. Where we're talking about living in community, living in sacred geometry, living in material that's non-toxic for us, that settles our nervous system, that works with conscious living more so than what we've been used to in our society for years and centuries. And the concept behind it of community, not just living in community, but also even funding through community and growing through community. Everything about it is just like, yes, this is where we're going. This is where we should be going. And this is where I personally want to go with my family and my living situation. And I'm just so excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, Angela.
Yeah.
I'm excited to delve.
Yeah, me too. Plus my listeners, because they've heard me talk about Geoship and they've heard me say, oh, I'm reserving one. And they're like, what is this? What is this technology? What is this movement? What is this all about? I'm going to talk a little bit because I always like how stories drive the narrative. And my story with Geoship and how this world is so synchronistic. And I hate the word coincidence because it's not real. Everything is just like always there, right? There's no coincidence. I was coming back from a very deep, deep ceremony from Northern California. I was there for like three days of plant medicine journeys, but also just like deep awareness. And my channels were ripped wide open. And on the drive home, the 8-hour drive home, I was still very connected. And I was like, show me how we're going to be living in the near future. And what I saw was little cabins, but also these domes, those geometric dome shaped homes. And I was like, wow, okay. And then I dove in further in my drive on that. And then when I got home, I ran across Geoship's information and I was like, oh, whoa, this is cool. And then in December, I saw some of your crowdfunding rounds and then it was like in my face. And then I had to invest because I was like, yeah, okay, this makes sense to me. That's how I came across Geoship and the understanding what it is and what the concept is and how it developed and where it's going. And it just made sense to me that this is the future of living in a nice, conscious community manner. So that's my story. And then currently I live in a roundhouse, which we were just talking about before we started. So I'm very aware of living in a round space. And when you go in ceremony with a lot of things, it's also in a round like ceremonial yurt or a round ceremonial building where it just amplifies the energy, the sacred geometry. We were talking earlier, you can't build anything round without at least a triangle, which is, stability in its essence of its form. I love everything about it. So I'm so excited to dive in. I heard some of your story and it's incredible where stop me if I'm wrong, but in your mid-20s, you traveled all over the place. But first you started on a sailboat in the Pacific Northwest, which is where I'm born and raised. And then living with the elements and on the elements, I think sparked something really deep inside. So that one day on a beach in Portugal, is that right? Where you just like for a day and a half, you were in it. You were in the zone, I don't know if you want to call it in the matrix, whatever, but or outside of it.
Outside.
Outside of it. And then that's where you kind of spurred with this innovation. From there, it led you to other places that were like synchronicities, I thought, in your own path. Can you dive in a little bit about that for people that don't know?
Sure. Yeah, it really started, I kind of went through a right out of university, I went and started working at Intel Corporation. So it was just kind of like a, corporate job. And and had never really taken the time to like really look at, what is my calling in life and how can I really contribute, right? You're just kind of on a uh going from, high school to university to a job. And so a few years into that job, I basically just said, you know, I I want to make sure that I will never regret, this portion of my life, right? So I just basically sold. I had bought a house in Arizona. I sold the house and left my partner and quit the job and just like bought a one-way ticket to Asia and to Bangkok and just started kind of vagabonding around Asia and India. And I ended up, traveling through Tibet with these like two old hippies from Maui. And it was the first time like seeing the pilgrims doing prostrations, they're like amazing. People would go for hundreds of miles, touching their forehead to the ground with the uh, people following along with the wheelbarrow full of their stuff. And they were going to like this next experience of life, right? The Rinpoche there explained it to me as like, well, we kind of believe life is like this great buffet table with all these different experiences that you can have, but there's one catch, you have to return to the table with a clear plate. So they were like leaving everything behind in order to kind of embark on this next kind of spiritual life. And so that really resonated, I was like, well, I'm in my early 20s. I need to like to get to zero and to just dedicate let's see kind of probe into the nature of reality a little bit. So
Yeah.
I just had that in mind, for the next 6 to 12 months kind of on the road. And then I was laying on a beach in Portugal one morning with some music on the headphones and it just sort of triggered this like I call it like a Satori experience, where I just stood up and everything felt really synchronistic and also like a levity and like my mind was not thinking about the things that he usually thinks about. And that lasted, for a day and a half. And then at that moment I was like, okay, nothing else really matters but some deep meditation retreats and to like understand that and what were the what was the physical environment, what was the mindset, how many people are operating at this level on like a regular basis, what is it, right? And
Yeah.
so that led to basically some long vipassana meditation retreats and then work with the plant medicines eventually. And then I restored a wooden sailboat and lived on that for about 6 years all around the Pacific, basically because my goal was to build a small home in nature and kind of teach myself to be an artist, right?
Uh,
But buying the house and building and everything was kind of also felt kind of like locked down in a sense. So the wooden sailboat was like a small home in nature where I could learn to be an artist, and that was kind of
yeah.
that for a while. And then,
Well, you become quite the artist. Yeah.
well, it was just so I
Oh,
to continue like how Geoship kind of comes out of that, right?
yeah.
Is like uh it was 2011 or something, and I had it kind of was at a point where I was like, okay, I feel like I've done the inner work enough where now how can I really be of service to society, right? Like what's my highest path of service? And so the freedom of information war had basically begun, where it was like, WikiLeaks was John Perry Barlow, the founder of the Electronic Freedom Foundation, was like, the information war has officially begun and the battlefield is WikiLeaks. And had been using the I Ching Oracle a lot during that last like 6 years at sea, like looking at, if I go down, give me an image of the situation if I go down this route or this route and this time frame or that time frame, and kind of, tapping into that realm a little bit to kind of follow the thread of synchronicity. And I ended up buying a one-way ticket to London, and I knocked on the door where Julian was on. She was like America's most wanted man at that point. He was on house arrest. And I said I wanted to help, right? So I volunteered for WikiLeaks for a little bit, and then he introduced me to this woman in Iceland who was like, her name was Brigitte Jansdottir, and she was kind of the woman behind WikiLeaks. And there was this whole thing happening in Iceland at that time that was really inspiring, in that basically their economy collapsed like overnight, 95% reduction in the value of their currency. So they, Iceland is an island with like 250,000 people or 300,000 people, something very small population. So when you have like 20, 30,000 people camped out around parliament in tents and banging pots and pans, like it's a big deal, right? It's 10% of the country. So they did that, and they got a new political party in office, and their whole mission was to basically create the world's safe haven for information and journalists and whistleblowers, right? So that what happened to Iceland could never happen to other nations, and then wouldn't happen again to them either. So there was a really strong feeling of like evolutionary purpose. Like the people of Iceland were, all of a sudden it was something like 60, 70% of the population were aligned with this new political party that was then the movement party, now called the pirate party. And they were basically crowdsourcing a revision to their 1100-year-old parliament to make Iceland like the world's safe haven for information. And they were using digital democracy, right? They were using internet technology to crowdsource a revision to their constitution or to their parliament. And so you felt the same thing I felt on the beach in Portugal, I felt in the streets of Reykjavik, right? And it wasn't because of, my mindset or the physical, well, maybe a little bit in the physical environment, but it was really, I felt it was really because of the people, right? That were aligned on like a common evolution, a common purpose that was something greater than themselves. And they were really passionate and dedicated to it. And so those two things, like having that experience in Iceland and on the beach in Portugal, was like, how do we bring this into the daily, more common experience, like at home in the US or for people around the world, where it's like the next generation. So basically I started asking the question to myself of what is how do we build communities like this, right? Because it's about alignment with purpose, and it's like the physical environment, and basically housing is kind of the building block for like the tool to build community. So we asked, what will the home of, like, zoom your attention 100 years into the future, what is going to be like the most common form of housing on earth, right? This single family kind of home. And you basically, to answer that question, you got to get into like the physics first principles, like what's the geometry, what's the materials, how's it made.
Yeah.
So I'll pause there for a second. It was maybe a lot.
Yeah. The triangle is interesting because I know that's a huge piece of the design point for a lot of these geometric houses that are coming online specifically to Geoship. That it's stabilization, but it's not just that. It's, if the elements, right, they all are represented by a triangle, right? The sun, the fire, and the water, and the earth, and all that stuff. So I was doing my own research for some other technology I'm looking into for healthcare. And when I was looking at sacred geometry and really going into the weeds on that subject, I noticed that there was some documentation and people working some studies back in the Tibetan days, like centuries ago, where they were doing this thing with sacred geometry, and a lot of it was around the triangle, right? And that there was two different groups that participated, and one group that participated were wearing geometry all over their robes and their clothes and their necklaces and their jewelry, and then meditated with sacred geometry. And then they also made sure that their houses were sacred geometry, the floor and the ceiling, the wallpaper, or whatever. And then the other group didn't do any of that, right? Then over time, they realized that those that were living in, around, and with sacred geometry could stabilize their nervous system way far more and faster and amplified than those who didn't, which also creates harmony, higher consciousness, higher levels of amplification within their family units, of coherence and everything. So I think that was also what drew me to Geoship was like, oh yeah, we have to live in the sacred geometry too. So the more that we awaken within our world and work with our planet and everything she has, the more that our living standards need to be that way to hold this coherence and hold this energy, right?
Mhm.
This light. So I'm also intrigued by the material in which you're using. I read something somewhere, and maybe going a little deeper that it kind of mimics the way our bones are structured. Is that the materials
Yeah,
how
it
they
mimics
work?
the same chemistry as bone. You know, it's
Mhm.
potassium, magnesium, calcium, phosphate, like the whole home is basically synthetic bone. They actually use the same material we're making the entire home out of. They use as a bone repair cement in the body. You know, it's a bioceramic.
That's amazing. That is truly amazing. So that let's go down that path then of the building materials. And how did you come across these materials, knowing that most of the houses we live in today throw off toxic environments?
Mm.
Older homes probably have mold. We don't see them until it's too late, or when we do see them, that it's very expensive. We have to evacuate our homes for a while. Whereas even brand new homes, then you have the toxicity of the new paint, the new fresh floors, the new electronics like the ovens and stuff, and all that. So I know that you're putting a conscious effort into the materials to keep away from the toxicity of living better.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, when you think about what will the home of the future be like, you ask, you know, what is the materials and the geometry? And the geodesic is it's a, you know, triangulated sphere, right? So it's actually they say it's the lightest, strongest, most efficient form known to man, right? You just kind of get more efficient and distribution of stress and whatnot is kind of optimized with this triangulated sphere. And it happens, it's also the flower of life in 3D. Like when you know, the really well-known flower of life patterns, usually imagine it in 2D, but if you make it 3D, it is the geodesic dome. So you've
Mhm.
basically got a golden ratio spiral. Like if you go up the dome and connect the hubs, right, where the you know struts connect, it makes a golden ratio spiral. So that's you know the form. It makes so much sense from like the physics and the structural integrity, but it's also like this geometry that is golden ratio and there's a lot of studies that show basically that that kind of geometry, like there are, it's really common, you know, in the Tibetan lineage and whatnot, and other Buddhists, when like they want you to make sacred geometry, like make
Mhm.
something, either painting or making artifacts, because it kind of just is, it gets the brain thinking in a different way. And there's good studies showing, you know, that fractal geometry kind of creates a more sense of ease. You know,
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense. You know, when you think of like what is the angle that is that causes things to scatter? You know, it's like
Uh-huh.
right angle, right? When it's air,
Yeah.
whatever, it's the one angle where things scatter, and any
Yeah.
other angles are more focusing. So basically, when we looked at all of the like the Vastu Shastra temple building science out of ancient temple building science out of India, or like biogeometry out of
Uh-huh.
Egypt, the common thread in these is basically materials and geometry. You want materials that are high dielectric, like in the electrical engineering world, materials that hold a charge, right? They're not insulators, not conductors. They're like the ceramic capacitors in our electronic devices. They hold a charge, or like certain stones have that high dielectric constant. Also, hardwoods have a higher dielectric than like softwoods. So when you have material that basically holds a charge and geometry that focuses it into the center, you have this kind of pyramid stone circle effect, right? Where pyramid means fire in the middle. It's about focusing into the center.
Yeah.
And that is kind of, we kind of think of it as like, it's kind of the opposite of radiation, right? Radiation is like charge that's leaking outward from center. And the opposite of that is charge that is like folding into itself. So fractal.
Sure.
And
Yep.
we're able to measure this with, we use like a biophotonic camera, or what they call gas discharge variability camera, to measure kind of the charge distribution efficiency in the space. We have a project that's really kicking off this spring and summer, that more intently and with like a professor of architecture from the University of Florida and some of his students where they're starting to measure heart rate variability, brainwave coherence, plant growth, seed germination rates to basically show how materials that have a high dielectric constant plus geometry that focuses into the center. And then the basics, that's kind of like the high level or higher potential of architecture to actually create that charge field that is helps your
Yeah.
body more into coherence. And then if your mind and heart is more in coherence when you come into the space, you're also going to be able to connect more deeply with the people around you because it's like, imagine it's like we think of like two pine cones kissing noses, right? Like
Yeah.
ratio spirals coming into one another. And that's
Yeah.
what's happening in a space when people are in coherence. It's like that we're able to
Yeah.
connect deeply to one another and to the natural world. We're measuring actually this in that biogeometry is this kind of design science. It's out of Egypt, and the way they think of it, which I think makes a lot of sense, is this like we're in the ether, right? There's like imagine
Yeah.
that all around us is water, and everything that moves is like putting out a wake behind it. So the whole science of biogeometry and what the ancient Egyptians and whatnot were doing with hieroglyphs and statues and pyramids and whatnot is to create kind of a harmonic, like mandalas of energy patterns in the ether, because everything that moves puts out that wake. And when that wake hits a physical object, it changes its shape. So how do we actually engineer the physical environment to be more, to basically harmonize the electromagnetic field? So they measure, with like a pendulum. A lot of times they're measuring for this, what they call a centering energy. And right now with our prototypes, that's emanating maybe 60, 70 feet outside
Okay.
the dome. And as we
Yeah.
gear in more resonance technology, because it's basically bioceramic is a highly crystalline material.
Yeah.
It's like a ceramic. It's highly crystalline. So you're kind of like living in a sacred geometry crystal.
Crystal bone. Yeah.
And layer more resonance technology into it to make that um, centering quality, that energy kind of emanate a little further. And then imagine a whole community of them that are designed like this. Like it's kind of like conditioning.
Overlapping.
Yeah, it's architecture that's really designed to harmonize the electromagnetic field in a whole space, not only inside the home, but in the area around it. And
Yeah.
this bioceramic material was really kind of first identified as like a new family of materials in kind of the late 90s by
Mhm.
Professor Roy. And
Okay.
he was kind of the head of the biggest material science lab in the US at Penn State. And he's kind of like a legendary material scientist, that was really making big breakthroughs. They invented like the cubic zirconia, right? The big or lab grown diamond, I should say. And towards the end of his life, he was creating, kind of defining a new science of whole person healing, right? So he was
Uh,
studying how does the gong master, focus her attention and change like actually heat up a thermometer, right? Or like change the molecular structure of water in a way that was measurable with their kind of lab, Raman spectroscopy or whatever, measuring the uh, molecular structure of water and how that can
uh,
be changed when people focus their attention on it in the right, well-trained way. Um, so he kind of defined it as a new family of materials called chemically bonded ceramics, like ceramics that can harden at room temperature without high heat. And that led to basically a 10-year R&D project at U.S. National Labs, Argonne National Labs, for use in the nuclear industry, where they have
uh,
like, it's like basically the biggest environmental disaster in human history, which is the Hanford plant in Washington, where they built the nuclear bombs for the World War. And still it's like, big underground tanks full of nuclear sludge. And the cleanup project is like $80 billion to be spent over, or $500 billion, multiple hundreds of billions of dollars to be spent between now and 2080 to clean up this sludge. And the old technology was basically they would take that sludge and turn it into boron glass, like a vitrification process to make something hard that they could then go store in a mountain. So this was like the replacement for boron glass vitrification. You didn't have to use high heat. It was a little better, right? But it's also, they kind of called it stardust, right? It was like a material that they'd mix with the radiation to solidify something into a pellet for long-term storage. So we, it's kind of amazing in terms of the properties that it combines. You know, it's like it's a ceramic and that it's highly crystalline, but it's like a cement and that it all happens kind of at room temperature, you know, like an epoxy, and then it forms molecular bonds like a super glue. You know, you can
Yeah.
take two pieces and kind of glue them together with the same
Yeah.
material, and they kind of become more like it grows into, it's like a geological feature. You know, you can create a rock essentially. So really exciting kind of new material that enables, I think, the geodesic dome for the first time. Like the geodesic dome has existed for quite a while, you know, since the Buckminster Fuller kind of defined the geometry in like the 50s and 60s. But he called them wooden spaceships. You know, it's like the right form, but it's not the right material. And the geodesic domes you see today kind of have like, you know, shingles and siding, and they're kind of built with, you know, wood, and they're hard to make not leak, right? But with
Yeah.
this material, you can basically create a continuous composite shell, like a monolithic dome that is made from discrete triangles. So it just kind of, and the manufacturing technology then is basically formative manufacturing, where you're just making these cassettes, these parts in a factory, and then putting them together on site. And
Yeah.
versus like 3D printing on site or cutting everything, you know, from stock material, you're forming it, formative manufacturing versus additive or subtractive. So that combination, you know, material like these next generation kind of ceramic and geopolymer materials, plus the geodesic dome, plus this like formative manufacturing, is really, really exciting kind of engineering challenge that is the outcome is something that is very scalable and sustainable and climate resilient. And then you add on the health benefits here of not only like, you know, we have a lot of like naturopathic doctors that are interested in the product, because one of the key things with their clients, you know, they want to get the clients in like mold free, low EMF environment. And then
Totally.
once they're in a mold free, low EMF environment, then they can start doing some work, you know, prescribing um, prescription.
Well,
Like,
they can maintain their health and, you know, and clear it. Once it's clear, that they can maintain it at a steady rate so that they don't have these flux of, yeah, mold is so horrible. You know, it can really do a lot of damage to all of us. There's lots of studies on that for sure.
yeah,
Um,
with the bioceramic, there's like, you know, it's mimicking human bone, right? It was mentioned the
yeah.
chemical composition, but so there's not, it's inorganic, right? Not
Yeah.
set for mold to grow on. Uh,
Yeah.
and it has this high dielectric property, and it also emits far infrared light. They actually take the same bioceramic powders and weave them into like the threads of clothing, and it's like a bioceramic sleepwear by Under Armour, right? It's like Tom Brady from the New England Patriots was like the spokesperson.
Yeah. Yeah.
Takes
Yeah.
these heat uh,
Uh-huh.
and reflects it back in the far infrared spectrum, right?
Sweet.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a far infrared sauna effect, but it's just like there's just so many. It was just really exciting kind of technology that could
Yeah.
basically enable regenerative communities, and that's what it's really all about for us. Was
Yeah.
like, how do we build communities that are regenerative, and that they improve our health, improve our relationships with one another, improve our relationships with the earth. And that's what, you know, regenerative in our, when we use that word, that's what it means to us, like net positive impact on biologically, sociologically, ecologically, basically improve the quality of our relationships with like the earth and the ecosystems that we're part of. So we see basically the home as like a tool to build, for people to build regenerative communities. One of the ways that we're organizing Geoship to support that is kind of introducing like the coordination layer for housing. So if you think of like how major kind of industries have been transformed by basically the internet, you have like what Amazon did for commerce, what Airbnb did for travel, what Uber did for transportation, where it's like all of a sudden you're creating a marketplace, right? Like bringing buyers and sellers together and giving them the tools to kind of create markets that didn't exist before. And it's the same thing with uh, real estate in the future. Right now, we're still basically have a real estate model that is pre-internet, where it's developers and banks get together and buy land and build houses and sell them to people. And 100% of every neighborhood in the United States right now is rectilinear structures. There's not one neighborhood that is like non-rectilinear. There's houses like what you live in that is,
Yeah.
have been built, but not like whole communities. So what we see is basically uh, the way real estate development will happen in the future is that same disrupt or like transformation will happen, where you basically build community first and construction second, right? So you can bring the people together in the digital space. Somebody can say, I have a vision for a community. Here's what we're thinking, and kind of gather people around that. And then the community starts to build and kind of refine the vision together, and build relationships with one another. And then we can connect that community with like real estate agents, permaculture specialists, financing, and deliver homes, and have these kind of templates that um, help build community through the built environment. And there, what I mean by that is like, if you think of like the highest goal for urban design really is to facilitate communication. If you look
Uh-huh.
at like these campuses, like the Apple campus or the Google campus or whatever, they're all built in a way that is trying to get people to talk more, to have more, synchronistic meetings. So really basic things like there's a village heart. Most neighborhoods today don't even have a kind of center where people gather. It's weaves of paths, like multiple routes to certain destinations. And when you go through, like what we call like gateways and admissions. So there's just, when you enter this kind of threshold, it's a different quality
Mhm.
space. Maybe it's a garden for meditation versus like more of like an innovation place, where it's or a dance place. So just
Yeah.
the qualities of space are intended for different things. And that's
Yeah.
ways you can, structure the built environment to facilitate that kind of community to communication.
I
And
like that a lot. Yeah, like community, like little community building centers throughout the neighborhoods to to commune, join, play, whatever the need is for the community. I know that lately I've been joining any community call I can, because right now I'm trying to get out of my own isolation, if you will. Every single time I hear or any episode and I talk to a practitioner before we get on, and all of their community is asking for more community. So I love where this is going, because even predictions, mediums that predict and channelers, it's the same thing. We all see this huge strive and movement towards community, like our old indigenous communities used to be back, way back,
Mhm.
where they all had the same kind of round little huts and villages. They all helped raise their children. They all helped garden and, grow together. And that's kind of like the evolution of going backwards but forwards at the same time, right? Getting
Mhm.
back to part of it,
Yeah.
to live with the land itself as well.
Yeah. I mean, the circle is really key there, where it's
Yeah.
like, if you look at in nature, it's like the nests of birds and the planet, like everything is kind of trying to be round. Eventually it gets rounded
Yeah.
over time. And so
Yeah.
there's also, we actually, one of our really early advisors when Boss and I first kind of got together and started working on Geoship on Whidbey Island in Washington was a Coast Salish indigenous elder. His name was Squai. And he basically was saying that, they they talk about like these kind of four laws of change, like four laws of positive community change. And it was like that change, first of all, it starts from within, right? Any kind of positive change, it's starting within first in yourself. and then it's preceded by a vision. So there's some kind of collective intention for what this change will be. And and then the third law is a great learning takes place. Like everybody goes through sort of a learning journey in their own way, but they're all kind of going through it together in different learning what they need to learn, but in different ways, but at the same time. And then you plant a healing forest. So like the analogy is like when you take a sick tree out of the forest, you can take it into a nursery and make it better. But then if you put it back in a sick forest, it gets sick again. So you gotta
Sure.
for so basically, how do we create a community development model that is like the new, not an alternative one, but like the main, the new mainstream neighborhood development model that really honors these like laws of change and enables communities to form first in the digital space before the physical, before construction takes place, so that you can um, it kind of, for me, it like ties back to that, what I described, that feeling in Iceland, where you have a mass of people who are aligned around a common purpose and have similar values. And then that kind of levity or like, yield
Yeah.
generated. And how do we,
Yeah. Carrying the same intention and amplifying it with multiple people. I mean, that, HeartMath Institute has been doing a ton of research about that, about groups, small groups, large groups, whatever, all carrying the same intention and amplifying that in space. And there's some real like evidence showing finally in science that it works, right? And so I see your point, and I love the vision of this company so much. you know,
yeah, and
um,
it's also like who doesn't want to participate in the design of their neighborhood, right?
right?
Well, who,
Yeah, you're buying into the neighborhood, not
when
as
you
an
have
ask.
action, let's you want the place you live to be like a reflection of your values, your art, the community values, the community art, right? So there's just
Yeah.
throw
But you
feet.
want your neighbors to be like-minded so that you can actually be neighborly, right?
Yeah, and maybe not all the like-minded in terms of not all the same, but like good cultural additives. Like together, you create this kind of stew that is, you know,
Yeah. The
beautiful.
yin yang of your community, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, my neighborhood was built back in the late 60s, and I'm the only roundhouse on the hill, but all my other neighbors, they're all older people, and that's fine. But I'm not retired, and so they expect me to work my land like I'm retired like them, and it's not cohesive, and it's not in resonance, and it's not in coherence, and we have different things we're moving in. Building the community together before the house drops, I guess what you could say, is so much more ideal. Actually, like, what is that vision for you? We share that vision, and that everything great can come from that. Yeah.
yeah. And it happens to be it's a really powerful way for a company to like, you know, create a new market, like create demand for the product. We have like a sales, sort of a pipeline of communities who are starting to build relationships with one another and really clear on what their vision is. So we have like a good, uh, the more of that we can show, the faster we can like build factories and deliver more homes. Right. So it kind of fits.
Absolutely. So building factories to deliver more homes, because I, who am very eager to get my body and family in one, I know that you kicked off some crowdfunding. Do you want to talk about that a little bit to see how people can get involved into a community, and perhaps listening to this being like, yeah, that just makes some sense. Something sparks to me like, yes, this is my direction by listening to it today. How can they get involved to be part of this community too, and find their own community?
Sure. Yeah. So let me take just uh, one more point. We think of Geoship, well, it's the home manufacturing, the community building platform. And the third part of that stool is like the cooperative model, like the
Huh.
purpose driven cooperative model. How do we structure a company? Because the potential here is that we, are building like this, what becomes a giant company of the 21st century that is like building homes and communities, doing basically sacred work, right? So how do we
Yeah.
structure the company in a way that it can actually do that at scale without getting kind of caught up in the profit-driven capitalism, pure profit-driven capitalism market? Like profit is necessary so that you're not taking from somewhere else to make this happen. It's like self-generating, right? Profit is
Yes.
important from that perspective. But then, so basically to answer that question for us, there's kind of
Yeah.
two parts of it. We've taken Buckminster Fuller, who invented the geodesic dome, had this really beautiful mission statement that is just like ideally worded. And it's to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anybody. So we've taken that mission statement and written it into a perpetual purpose-driven trust where the company is optimizes for that, or,
Okay.
profit secondary to the purpose. And we have a bunch of metrics to basically dissect that mission statement and actually measure our progress toward it. And then we progressively decentralize so that if you think of like in the past, it was only the investors who owned companies, right? And
Yeah.
then kind of employee stock options and stuff started in like the 60s with companies like Intel was kind of one of the
Yeah.
pioneers of like employee stock options. So then you have multiple, it's not only the investor stakeholder, it's also the employee stakeholder who's owning the company. We see that continuing with like the customers will have ownership in the company, and nature, who's being basically extracted from, will have ownership in the company, so that you're creating net positive impact for all of the different stakeholders that are engaged with or somehow affected by the company.
Yeah.
So Geoship has been organized as with a perpetual purpose-driven trust and the intention to progressively decentralize so that customers and nature will own about 30 to 50% of the company as it scales. And so part of that was like we can't go out to venture capitalists and maybe we could, but we didn't want to go out to venture
Yeah.
capitalists and have them fund it. We
Not
want
fun.
no,
I've gotten on myself in tech and it's horrible. Yeah.
well, and one thing I wasn't aware of until I got into this more in the last like
Mhm.
5 or 7 years is like, it was actually illegal for the everyday person to invest in a private company until like 2017, right? It was like only if you think a private company, so like 80%, probably
Yeah.
huge portion of all the wealth in the world comes from private
Mhm.
companies that do create some service for society and create wealth in that way. But it was only, you have to be an accredited investor. So it was like kind of the 1% income bracket was the only ones allowed to invest in private companies that create all this wealth. You had to wait until they became a public company, do their IPO, and then you can invest. But all the big gains are really before IPO, is when you can invest and see 100x return or 1,000x, these huge returns. So we felt it's really important for have that investment opportunity like available to the retail, like everyday person, as well as the angel investors and eventually
Yeah.
the family offices and whatnot too. Um,
Yeah.
and it also enables us to have like, um, it's kind of like a blessing, when
Yeah.
you think of money as like congealed energy. This is like
Yeah.
you've worked for this in your life. It's your energy in a way. And when you put it into something, it's like we're creating a collective antenna together. We're creating something that is, so it's really powerful, I think, to have all these investors. We have almost 4,000 investors now.
Okay.
And it's also like, you can make a really good case for how it's over 60% of our investors are also customers. Like they want the dome. So it makes sense. Like, the business case for it is strong when you can raise capital for people.
Yeah. Yeah. It is.
So basically we have it open on our website now for the first time. We've kind of gone through like, WeFunder and Republic and whatnot. These kind of platforms are designed for retail investors to invest in private companies. And just in the last year, we kind of raised a seed round that was about $12 million in the last year from over 3,000 people. A lot of them were like 60 or 70 of them were angel investors, like accredited investors that invested, and then like thousands of retail investors are basically at the same terms. So it's really, I think this is how companies are all funded in the future too. It's like if you can create a market and enable people to invest in something that aligns with their values and like represents the world that they want to be part of, or like helps
Yeah.
catalyze the future, and you
And
get a
that,
return from it.
yeah, you're sharing that wealth, right? And everyone feels part of it. And then that helps manifest. It's almost like amplification of manifestation too. Because, everyone who invests in Geoship and other companies similar that are formulating that way, it's like, well, we all have the same intention. We want you to succeed so that we can all succeed together for not just the financial aspects of it, but for what it stands for, right? And so now all of these 4,000 investors are all amplifying the exact same intention for this to be successful. And why wouldn't you want to be part of that?
Yeah, so it's open on our website. People can go to basically invest.geoship.is and you can, see all the information about the investment opportunity, and you can ask questions on a discussion board there, and we can, me or someone from the team will, engage directly and answer your questions, and basically own shares in the company. And as we grow and become successful, you'll see big returns on that, but you also have to hit the venture investment in a technology company. So the risk is that we fail and you lose your investment completely, right? So you kind of have to only invest the amount that you feel comfortable losing.
It's still an investment at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
It's
the
a,
disclaimer. Yeah.
it's a high risk return investment, right?
Exactly. And so how do you see community continuing to shape Geoship into the future as you continue forward?
Yeah. Well, we see, basically the company being, governed by the different stakeholders. So the customers and nature stewards, people who are kind of representing the ecosystem that we engage with, and the investors and the crew, the team, and actually being able to create a company that allows all those voices to kind of guide it. That it's actually governed by all those different stakeholder groups, which wasn't really, it's kind of sounds good, but it wasn't really possible until more recently with like what that technology they used in Iceland was called liquid democracy technology. Was kind of the beginning of it. And now with AI and whatnot, you can kind of find the signal in the noise and be able to run a company that way.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, I think if companies aren't run that way in the future, they'll just be rendered obsolete by ones that are, because
Yeah, I would agree.
and is like, centralized systems don't really scale. They get like less innovative as they scale. It's like, but you
Yep.
think of like how companies, right? Companies start, but they're hierarchical and they get slower and less innovative as they scale. But like a city,
100%.
for instance, is like the opposite, right? It gets more innovative as it scales because it's kind of decentralized. It's not a hierarchy. I think companies of the future basically scale like cities of today and get more innovative as they grow because they're decentralized.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. How do you imagine people 20, 30 years from now with Geoship? What do you vision in your meditations or in your everyday as you continue to grow and meet these milestones you're meeting with Geoship? How do you see that in the future?
Well, I mean, we see scaling to, many millions of homes per year, which is like thousands of new regenerative communities every year. So there's
Mhm.
not, there's hardly any that exist today. The ones that they're like just starting, or they're, these really old kind of intentional community experiments, but there's not like regenerative villages that are designed, in this way with sacred geometric, biologically resonant architecture. So I see people, waking up in the morning and you're in a highly crystalline, sacred geometric structure. So first thing you see when you open your eyes is like sacred geometry, and that kind of love vibration, that
Yeah.
quality vibration is there in the space. You walk out and you're, connected to your neighbors. You know your neighbors. The village is designed in a way where the community gardens and things like that support the connection to one another, and that the ecosystems around them are thriving. People are back to a lot of the ways that the indigenous people understood their relationship with the ecosystems and with nature, where they're actually like partners with nature. Like, for instance, even the very first dome that we are just installed and are starting to build the full little community that's called Unity Ridge here in Nevada City. The first thing we
Uh-huh.
do, we go out and put the hands and feet in the land for a second and like ask permission. It's like explain to the land what we're doing here. It's going to be disruptive and some trees are going to be removed.
Yeah.
But we're a greater, like there's a net positive thing here that's going to be
Yeah.
better for all, just like explaining that and asking permission. And it's like just starting the relationship with the natural world in that way.
It makes a big difference. Yeah. I've been working a lot with the trees lately. They've really been loud for the last couple of months, and the land. And, they are just as part of us as we are them. And a lot of people have lost sight of that for sure. To have this ecosystem of this community understanding the relationship with the land and honoring it and giving back and listening to them is just such a beautiful thing. And I certainly want to live in a world like that.
Yeah. And to build, we're designing for a 500-year design life, right? Because I mentioned it's like a continuous
Yeah.
composite shell. So it's like the home is kind of like a geological feature,
Yeah.
and like
Can't blow that down. Yeah.
you can't shake it down, you can't blow it down, and you can repair and resurface it with the same material it's made from. So there's no reason for it to have to be knocked down and replaced ever.
Yeah.
So we build communities where it's like you're building a legacy, for future
Yeah.
generations, and like your kids and grandkids are gonna know that this is the village, and they'll come home to it at some point in the future, and it'll be connected to other villages that will also have shared
Yeah.
and values, and be able to kind of live nomadic lifestyles too, where you're not totally locked into this specific home, but your equity in this home can transfer to another home in another village, and just have more kind of fluidity in how
Yeah.
we, and homes that are designed to be permanent geological features.
Beautiful. And in residence to the way we naturally live anyway, or should be. Yeah. I love it. Absolutely love it. Is there something else that's maybe you could share that people can start living in a conscious way now while we wait for these domes, and so that we can start living harmoniously or moving into that direction?
Most of our focus so far has just been on the physical product, all of the engineering and manufacturing technology and whatnot. But this year, we're starting to focus more on bringing the people together who are going to live in community in the future. So we're launching a network here. It's like using the Circle platform, where you can kind of, be able to set up a profile and connect with other kind of like-minded people, and start to imagine how you want to live together in the future, and where it's going to be, and how do you start to organize around it. And, the thing with real estate development, it's a lot of times building a community, like a neighborhood, is a 3 to 7 year process, right? So
Yeah.
start to think maybe not everything is right now financially or whatever. You have reasons, but you can start imagining what that kind of ideal future is for you, and connecting with people who also kind of, you want to live near family and friends, and start through the process together.
Or new family and friends. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for such an amazing, very informative, educational, inspiring conversation today. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Angela. It's really nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. All of the information on Geoship will also be at the end of this episode and in the description. Live harmoniously, right? I love the future of where we're going. So thank you.
Yes. All right. Yeah. Bless. Thank you.
As we come to a close, what stands out most to me is this reminder that community does not begin with buildings. It begins with shared values, shared intention, and a willingness to imagine something different together. Homes, neighborhoods, and villages are not just structures. They are the containers that shape how we relate, how we heal, and how we belong. If this conversation sparks something in you, whether it's curiosity, resonance, or just a quiet yes, I encourage you to explore Geoship further and learn more about how their community-driven model is unfolding. You can find information about Geoship and their current community investment opportunities at invest.geoship.is. As always, take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and stay open to the ways community might be calling you home.